The first sentence is the shortest confession in Russian literature. I am a sick man. That is the opening line of Notes from Underground. 6 words. And already, in the second sentence, the narrator is contradicting himself. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man. I believe my liver is diseased. 3 sentences in and we already have 4 self-diagnoses, none of them entirely believable, all of them delivered with the air of somebody who is testing the reader. Notes from Underground is 150 pages long. It sold badly. Dostoevsky wrote it under enormous financial pressure. His wife was dying of tuberculosis in Moscow, his brother's health was failing, his own epilepsy was making writing physically difficult, and he owed a printer's debt he could not clear. He wrote it in about 6 weeks. He believed it was slight compared with what he wanted to write next, which was a novel he was already sketching about a young man who kills a pawnbroker with an axe. He was right, in a way. Notes from Underground is smaller than Crime and Punishment. It is also, structurally, the moment when Dostoevsky invents the 20th century. The claim I want to make today is that Notes from Underground is the single most influential political book written in the 19th century that almost nobody has read as a political book. It is usually taught as psychology, as philosophy, as the birth of existentialism. All of those things are true. But underneath, and I mean literally underneath the floor of the argument, is a very specific piece of political counter-programming. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Because the entire modern debate about human nature and social engineering runs, still, along a line Dostoevsky drew in 1864. Let me start with what he was answering. The year before Notes from Underground was published, a Russian radical named Nikolai Chernyshevsky published a novel called What Is to Be Done. It sold, by the standards of Russian publishing, spectacularly. It was passed around student circles in St. Petersburg and Moscow like a manifesto. Chernyshevsky was in prison at the time. The Tsar's secret police had arrested him for revolutionary activity, so the novel was written on smuggled paper, and its slightly amateurish sentences carried the extra glamour of a book almost banned. The book proposed, in the frame of a romantic story about a young woman escaping an unhappy marriage, a complete plan for reorganizing human life. The plan went like this. Human beings, Chernyshevsky argued, are rational calculators of their own interest. If you set up the correct social and economic conditions, cooperative workshops, dormitory housing, communal childcare, the abolition of property, the abolition of traditional marriage, the abolition of bourgeois personal privacy, then people will freely choose the actions that benefit both themselves and the collective. There is no conflict, Chernyshevsky claimed, between individual happiness and rational social organization. It is simply a matter of getting the arithmetic right. The book's most famous image was a crystal palace, a great transparent building of iron and glass, borrowed from Chernyshevsky's memory of the London exhibition of 1851, in which he saw the future of humanity. A society made rational. A society made transparent. A society with the mathematics finally solved. Dostoevsky read the book in prison camp, then again after his release, then a third time when it began circulating among the young Russian intelligentsia. He hated it. He did not hate it, at first, for political reasons. Dostoevsky in 1864 was not the reactionary Christian nationalist he would later become. He was, at that moment, a former revolutionary himself. He had been sentenced to death in 1849 for belonging to a socialist reading circle, pardoned at the scaffold in Semyonovsky Square, and exiled for 4 years to a Siberian prison camp. He had come out of that experience politically softened but morally hardened. He was not opposed to reform. He was opposed to Chernyshevsky's underlying claim about human nature. And he believed that if that claim went uncontested, the reform Chernyshevsky was proposing would end in something terrible. Notes from Underground is his answer. The book is structurally divided into 2 parts. The first part is a monologue by the unnamed narrator, from his cellar apartment in St. Petersburg, addressing an imaginary reader. The second part is a piece of memoir from 20 years earlier, in which the narrator describes a humiliating incident with a group of old schoolmates and a subsequent night with a young prostitute named Lisa. The first part is philosophical. The second part is narrative. Together they form what Dostoevsky himself called a mouse coming out from under a stove and telling the truth about mice. In the first part, the narrator picks up Chernyshevsky's argument by name. He is angry, he says, at the men who believe you can build a crystal palace on the assumption that human beings will freely choose what is good for them. Because, and here is the passage that would be quoted in every subsequent political tract for a century, a human being, given a crystal palace, will find some way to break it. Not because he is stupid. Not because he does not understand his own interest. But because, above every rational preference a human being has, there is a stubborn preference for one specific thing above all others. And that thing is the ability to say no. I want to underline that. Because it is not the sentimental reading of notes from underground that you sometimes hear, that people are irrational, that we are wounded, that we are messy, that we should honor our messiness. Dostoevsky's argument is sharper and stranger than that. He is saying, even a completely rational human being, presented with a completely optimized social arrangement, will do something to sabotage it. Not because he wants to be worse off. But because being told what is good for him even by a correct mathematics is worse for him than being worse off. He will kick over the arithmetic to prove the arithmetic did not decide it. That is what the narrator of Notes from Underground calls, in one of the most quoted passages of the whole century, the most advantageous advantage. The one preference we cannot renounce. The preference to be the source of our own preferences. This is not, Dostoevsky is at pains to say, a virtue. The narrator of the book is not a hero. He is a small, sick, spiteful ex-clerk who has ruined most of his own relationships and can barely leave his room. His freedom is exercised entirely in the negative. He refuses. He sneers. He humiliates the one person who tries to love him. His freedom looks nothing like the free individual of Enlightenment philosophy. And Dostoevsky is showing us this on purpose. He is saying, this is what freedom looks like when it is not attached to anything larger than itself. It is a sick man in a cellar refusing to walk across a room. But, and this is the crucial move, Dostoevsky is also saying that this sick man is, in his refusal, more human than the smoothly functioning citizen of Chernyshevsky's Utopia. Because the Utopia has removed from the citizen the one thing that makes a human, which is the possibility of saying no. Once you remove that, whatever remains is not a person. It is a component. Now let me connect this to now. We live in a period in which we are being asked, again, in 100 different ways, to accept the arithmetic. Sometimes the arithmetic is behavioral nudge economics. Sometimes it is engagement optimization on our phones. Sometimes it is data-driven urban planning. Sometimes it is public health guidance. Sometimes it is corporate management theory. Sometimes it is the algorithmic sorting of a dating app. In every case, the pitch is the same as Chernyshevsky's. If we set up the conditions correctly, and if you cooperate, the result will be better for you than any decision you would have made yourself. The arithmetic knows what you want better than you do. And in every case, human beings do what the narrator of Notes from Underground predicted. They cheat the recommendation algorithm on purpose. They break their diet the day they are told to keep it. They vote against their own economic interest. They swipe left on the perfect match because the app told them the match was perfect. Not because they are irrational. Because they refuse to be the outputs of somebody else's inputs. The argument of Notes from Underground is that this refusal is not a bug in human nature. It is the operating system. And any political program, of any ideological color, which tries to build itself on the assumption that human beings can be reliably optimized into cooperation, will hit that operating system as its final and non-negotiable obstacle. Marxism hit it in the 20th century. Behavioral economics is hitting it now. Every regime that has tried to build a crystal palace has, sooner or later, discovered that some of the glass has been broken from the inside. That is what Dostoevsky was warning about in 1864. It is what he was telling Chernyshevsky, and telling the students who were passing Chernyshevsky's book around St. Petersburg like a sacrament. He was saying, the mouse in the cellar is not going to accept your palace. And if you try to force him, the mouse will burn the palace down. He was, in that sense, right about the 20th century before it happened. And he is, arguably, still right about ours. Notes from Underground is 150 pages long. Almost nothing happens. A man argues with himself. He gets pushed at a party. He fails to fight a duel. He humiliates a young woman. He goes back to his cellar. And in those 150 pages, one of the largest arguments in the history of political thought is quietly made, and never quite refuted. If this changed how you think about Notes from Underground, subscribe. We break down the most important books ever written, one argument at a time. New video every week. And if this was worth 10 minutes of your life, hit like. It helps the channel more than you think.